Chapter 2 of Oscar Wilde, His Life and Confessions. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Oscar Wilde, His Life and Confessions, by Frank Harris. Chapter 2. Oscar Wilde as a Schoolboy. The Wildes had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. The first son was born in 1852, a year after the marriage, and was christened after his father, William Charles Kingsbury Wills. The second son was born 2 years later in 1854, and the names given to him seem to reveal the nationalist sympathies and pride of his mother. He was christened Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde, but he appears to have suffered from the pompous string only in extreme youth. At school he concealed the Fingal. As a young man he found it advisable to omit the O'Flaherty. In childhood and early boyhood Oscar was not considered as quick or engaging or handsome as his brother Willie. Both boys had the benefit of the best schooling of the time. They were sent as boarders to the Portora School at Enniskillen, one of the 4 royal schools of Ireland. Oscar went to Portora in 1864 at the age of 9, a couple of years after his brother. He remained at the school for 7 years, and left it on winning an exhibition for Trinity College, Dublin, when he was just 17. The facts hitherto collected and published about Oscar as a schoolboy are sadly meagre and insignificant. Fortunately for my readers, I have received from Sir Edward Sullivan, who was a contemporary of Oscar both at school and college, an exceedingly vivid and interesting pen picture of the lad, one of those astounding masterpieces of portraiture only to be produced by the plastic sympathies of boyhood and the intimate intercourse of years lived in common. It is love alone which in later life can achieve such a miracle of representment. I am very glad to be allowed to publish this realistic miniature, in the very words of the author. I first met Oscar Wilde in the early part of 1868 at Portora Royal School. He was 13 or 14 years of age. His long, straight, fair hair was a striking feature of his appearance. He was then, as he remained for some years after, extremely boyish in nature, very mobile, almost restless when out of the schoolroom. Yet he took no part in the school games at any time. Now and then he would be seen in one of the school boats on Lough Erne, yet he was a poor hand at an oar. Even as a schoolboy he was an excellent talker, his descriptive power being far above the average, and his humorous exaggerations of school occurrences always highly amusing. A favourite place for the boys to sit and gossip in the late afternoon in winter time was round a stove which stood in the Stone Hall. Here Oscar was at his best, although his brother Willie was perhaps in those days even better than he was at telling a story. Oscar would frequently vary the entertainment by giving us extremely quaint illustrations of holy people in stained glass attitudes, his power of twisting his limbs into weird contortions being very great. I am told that Sir William Wilde, his father, possessed the same power. It must not be thought, however, that there was any suggestion of irreverence in the exhibition. At one of these gatherings, about the year 1870, I remember a discussion taking place about an ecclesiastical prosecution that made a considerable stir at the time. Oscar was present, and full of the mysterious nature of the Court of Arches. He told us there was nothing he would like better in after life than to be the hero of such a cause célèbre, and to go down to posterity as the defendant in such a case as Regina versus Wilde. At school he was almost always called Oscar, but he had a nickname, Grey Crow, which the boys would call him when they wished to annoy him, and which he resented greatly. It was derived in some mysterious way from the name of an island in the upper Loch Erne, within easy reach of school by boat. It was some little time before he left Portora that the boys got to know of his full name, Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. Just at the close of his school career he won the Carpenter Greek Testament prize, and on presentation day was called up to the dais by Dr. Steele by all his names, much to Oscar's annoyance, for a great deal of schoolboy chaff followed. He was always generous, kindly, good-tempered. I remember he and myself were on one occasion mounted as opposing jockeys on the backs of two bigger boys in what we called a tournament, held in one of the classrooms. Oscar and his horse were thrown, and the result was a broken arm for Wilde. Knowing that it was an accident, he did not let it make any difference in our friendship. He had, I think, no very special chums while at school. I was perhaps as friendly with him all through as anybody, though his junior in class by a year. Willie Wilde was never very familiar with him, treating him always, in those days, as a younger brother. When in the head class together, we, with two other boys, were in the town of Enniskillen one afternoon, and formed part of an audience who were listening to a street orator. One of us, for the fun of the thing, got near the speaker and with a stick knocked his hat off and then ran for home, followed by the other three. Several of the listeners, resenting the impertinence, gave chase, and Oscar, in his hurry, collided with an aged cripple and threw him down, a fact which was duly reported to the boys when we got safely back. Oscar was afterwards heard telling how he found his way barred by an angry giant, with whom he fought through many rounds, and whom he eventually left for dead in the road, after accomplishing prodigies of valour on his redoubtable opponent. Romantic imagination was strong in him even in those schoolboy days, but there was always something in his telling of such a tale to suggest that he felt his hearers were not really being taken in. It was merely the romancing indulged in so humorously by the two principal male characters in The Importance of Being Earnest. He never took any interest in mathematics, either at school or college. He laughed at science, and never had a good word for a mathematical or science master, but there was nothing spiteful or malignant in anything he said against them, or indeed against anybody. The romances that impressed him most when at school were Disraeli's novels. He spoke slightingly of Dickens as a novelist. The classics absorbed almost his whole attention in his later school days, and the flowing beauty of his oral translations in class, whether of Thucydides, Plato, or Virgil, was a thing not easily to be forgotten. This photograph, so to speak, of Oscar as a schoolboy is astonishingly clear and lifelike, but I have another portrait of him from another contemporary, who has since made for himself a high name as a scholar at Trinity, which, while confirming the general traits sketched by Sir Edward Sullivan, takes somewhat more notice of certain mental qualities which came later to the fruiting. This observer, who does not wish his name given, writes: Oscar had a pungent wit, and nearly all the nicknames in the school were given by him. He was very good on the literary side of scholarship, with a special leaning to poetry. We noticed that he always liked to have editions of the classics